Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023 week 41, October 9th to October 15th, and we are going to start this out by putting some flame retardant paper inside the car. The reason why I'm doing this is, well, I should have done this a long time ago to protect the windshield and whatnot as I was working in the car, but I suppose better late than never. But I'm doing this because I'm going to be doing some grinding on the car, and I want to protect all of the wires and all of the stuff. The last thing I want to do is have like a spark chew through a wire and then I got to redo it, and yeah, that would just not be a good time. So let's just throw a little bit of paper in the car. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't take that long. So the reason why I'm doing this is when I mount the heater box in, it kind of mounts on 3 studs that I have welded to the firewall, and those studs are a little bit too long right now. So the top one, when I have it put the heater box kind of pushed back where I need it, it's hitting the front or the back side of the heater box. So I'm just going to tape this all off, get a rough measurement as to where I want the heater box placed, and then I will go ahead and cut those down. So what I did is I threaded some nuts onto the studs, and that will allow me to adjust the bottom, the top, and like where it sits in the car. So after I get this properly adjusted, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark on the stud on the front of the plate where I want it cut, and then what I will do is I will back the nut off so the back of the nut is at that mark, make another mark, and then cut it down to that point, as that should be enough space to get the heater box mounted onto the firewall and get a nut on there and be good to go. So I'm going to go through that process here. I'm just going to roll those nuts forward. I'm going to mark them, then roll them back, and after that I'm going to cut them. So I'm doing my best to get you some better camera angles. I know that going through some of the older videos, some of the camera angles aren't the best, or you can't see properly, so I'm trying to do better for you. With that all marked, we can just go ahead and cut these down. Now that these are cut down, I'm just going to take a flap disc and just kind of clean up the ends a little bit, just round them off a tiny bit. So with that more or less where I want it, I'm just going to pull this out and I'm going to start routing some of the heater vents or some of the heater vent lines. and it's just easier for me to do this out of the car because it is a very tight space. I gotta, pinch that hose down a little bit just to get it between the plate and the heater box. Yeah, so it works. I think that's gonna work just fine for what I need. You can see me pondering and just kind of wondering if it is gonna work, and yeah, I think it will. So I'm just taking a rough guesstimate as to where I need this, and I'm gonna cut the hose down to length and run with it. Trying to figure out where to run all these lines is kind of tough because I got a bunch of stuff going on under there. It's a very tight area, and so I'm just doing my best to try and figure out where it's all gonna go. Just take some time. So what I'm looking for right now is I'm looking for all of my AC fittings because I want to see how everything's going to fit in that tight little corner for the heater core and for the AC. So I'm just looking for those fittings. I know they're somewhere. Yeah, I ended up finding them. They were at the front of my storage. So we're going to pull this down. I'm going to grab like the big number 10 lines and just kind of see how it's all going to fit in there. So right now at this point, with a straight fitting coming off of the bulkhead connector, it hits the back of the fan pretty much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this bulkhead connector out. I'm going to undo the two lines, and then I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to put the heater lines on the bottom. I'm going to put the AC lines on the top, and we're going to see if that might work a little bit better. Yeah, so remember how I said I was going to try and get you some better camera angles? This is not one of them because you're just looking at my arm while I'm undoing some nuts on the bulkhead, or pulling that heater box down. So sorry about that. And of course, as I was undoing the bulkhead connector, I dropped one of the nuts and it rolled under the car somewhere. So I'm just looking for it, and I end up finding it, thankfully. So now that we've found the nut that I dropped on the ground, I'm just going to switch these heater hoses for the AC hoses and see if that might work a little bit better for us. back on. Let's get back to the inside and getting some of these heater hoses run. So what I'm doing here is I'm just, quickly bolting down, just tightening up the bolt for the mounting plate for the heater box. And what happened is the socket actually got stuck on the nut. I couldn't get it off with just the socket or, my hands. So I ended up having to grab a pair of pliers to get it out. And when I did that, I noticed that the socket, there's a screw in there for the universal joint. It was starting to back out. So, little side project, we're just going to tighten that up, and we're going to check all of the other universal sockets just to make sure none of them are loose. Alright, so here we have the first dash vent hose going on. So that's the front 4 ports. And so after getting this on, I realized, well, I need something for it to attach to. So I'm working back on the dash, working back on the actual heater vent boxes that I've built. And what I realized is when I was trying to put the vents on the back of this and mount it all into the dash, it didn't work. So I knew I needed to cut this down a bit to try and make it all fit in there. So normally I would never use my calipers to mark something out. That's a very bad practice, but in this case I did it. It's aluminum, it's soft enough-ish. And then after marking, I'm gonna go and just go over the mark with a Sharpie so that when I'm cutting, it's very clear what I'm cutting. Now that I have both boxes marked, I can go ahead and just cut them down to size. A little bit of deburring action here, and after these are deburred, we can take them back to the bench and we can actually check them on the dash and see how they're going to fit. But of course, before we do that, there is a ton of grinding dust on the floor and it's kind of slippery. So I'm just going to very quickly sweep all this crap up and get it out of the way. Before we get started on the dash, take a few pictures for Instagram. Alright, so here we are back on the dash. I got those pieces laid in. I'm just kind of laying this down on top of it, just to kind of check and see. And this is where I'm kind of realizing maybe I fucked up, because that vent mount is no longer tight up against the dash and sitting tight in the hole. And this is kind of when I realized I probably didn't need to cut it down, because I'm actually not attaching the vent ducts directly to these boxes. I'm actually attaching them to the dash now. So the reason why I initially thought I'd have to cut them down is because I was going to attach the vents directly to those boxes, but that's just not, I changed plans. So I mean, it's okay, it's not the end of the world. I am planning on redoing this dash anyways, and so when I redo it, I'll remake the boxes, and I won't have, I'll make them a bit deeper so that they fit in a little bit tighter, so that the air coming out is as close to the vent as possible. But for right now, with the goal of having the car on the road by next spring, so hopefully April, May-ish, I'm just going to push ahead and continue on forward and leave it as is for now. So for the next little bit of the video, I am just going to be welding these boxes to the dash. You've seen me weld before. I grind a bunch of tungsten. Enjoy. So one thing I'll say as I'm getting started here is one thing that I didn't notice as I was welding this is because that plate is so thin and long and there's kind of holes in it, the amount of heat I was putting into it, it actually starts bending the end up like a banana. So you'll be able to see this in the video because it's pretty gradual, but if you're watching for it, you'll see the end of it literally like pull up off the table like a banana. Not good. So this long one down the side is where it really starts to become noticeable in the video. You'll see it, like, just watch the bottom left corner and you'll see it really start pulling off as I'm welding. I didn't even really notice it there yet, so it gets even worse here. Yeah, look at that thing. It's like quarter to a half inch off the ground. So my first thought is like really quick, get this clamped down with a block of wood. Then I'm like, no, that's probably not going to work. So I'll just get this clamped down to the table. And let's see if we can't get it, you know, so while it's still warm, that it kind of gets better, gets its shape better. Long story short, this did not work at all. And what you'll see in the video, what I end up doing is I take all the clamps off, I clamp directly to the metal. I might leave that wood in there, but yeah, so I take a torch and I heat the aluminum, because what that's going to do is it's going to relax the aluminum, and when the aluminum gets heated up and relaxes, it'll go back to more, well, it'll go to whatever shape you have it like clamped down to. So if it's flat now, by heating it all up, getting it all nice and warm, it'll kind of just relax the metal and it'll go back to its normal shape. And then at the end of it, I do just kind of like bend it by hand a tiny little bit. It all ended up working out fine. It all ended up straight. But you'll notice on this side, what I do is as I'm welding it, I have 4 clamps on the piece every time I weld it. That way there's no way it's going to deform. Not 4 clamps, 3 clamps it looks like. I have 3 clamps on it at all times. got those welded. It's time to get a first look at those vents installed in their little pods and then kind of resting on the dash. And it works. It sits in there nicely. Everything is going as planned. I'm just quickly fitting in one of the gauges just to make sure there's enough clearance between the ring that holds it down and the actual weld. It's tight, but it's gonna work. So now that we know that's going to work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinstall the defrost duct on the dash and put the dash back in the car, make sure everything's going to fit and line up nicely. So, of course, in order to put the dash back in the car, you gotta loosen the steering column bolts and drop it down a little bit. So we're just getting the dash back in. I'm just kind of getting it loosely in place. And it's at this point in time that I do find there is an issue with the defrost duct where the heater box is mounted. And the adapter that I made to go from the heater box into the defrost adapter. So the shitty thing here is that the bottom of the adapter where the heating vents would attach onto are actually hitting the heater box. So I think I get you a little bit of a close-up in here so you can see. And this sucks. Obviously it's not what I want. I want defrost and I want the heater box where it is because everything kind of works right now. But it's not going to work. You know, if I didn't have the dash bar in here for the cage, the solution would be to move the heater box, you know, a few inches forward, maybe drop it down. You know, I would have a little bit more room to play, but because of what it is, it's very tight in there, so it does hit. So at this point in time, I'm trying to figure out what I can do. So I just take the defrost duct off and I just kind of ponder what I can do. So right now I'm just trying to see, like, can I make these ducts a little bit smaller? Maybe they don't need to be as long. So let's get the defrost duct back on, the dash back in the car, and let's take a look and see if that made any difference. And if I recall correctly, it maybe made a little bit of a difference, but not enough that I can get a hose on there. So with that, it didn't work, so we're just gonna take the heater duct back off. So what I've done here is, this is a little bit later, I've dumped out my little bin of random fox body parts, and I'm just putting some hardware back in the ends of the dash where it would screw into the metal frame of the dash. I'm just doing this because I don't want to forget to do it, and I'm procrastinating a little bit. But whatever, it's fine. I can put the dash back in the car, and I can at least carry on with the other 4 vents that need to go in here. So that's what I do. I try and get you some really good camera angles from like behind the dash as I'm working. But what I'm doing is I'm gonna start putting the other 4 dash lines from the heater box into the dash vents. There's the first vent and duct done. I'm pretty happy with how that came out. The only issue, and this is for all the vents, is that the vents are a little sloppy on the actual where they mount into the dash, so I'm gonna have to figure out some way to fix it better. Maybe what I'll end up having to do is just build a little tiny bracket for them all so that they get pushed in there. I'm not entirely sure yet, but for right now, just having it on there is good. I can secure it later. So this is the last vent, and I'm very happy with how these have all turned out. I'm going to need to do some more securing and, you know, zip tie all of the vent lines together and stuff like that. But it turned out pretty well. So what I did is, off camera, I built a block off plate. So my plan is that opening would have come from the factory vent ducts and would have split to each defrost vent. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to block that off, and then in the front of the piece, so that would be like the top of it if we were looking at it now, the back side, what I'll do is I'll 3D print up some pieces, I'll drill holes in there, mount it to the front, and then have the lines run into the front. That way they don't have to come into the bottom, which actually hits the heater box. And I think that's about the only way I'm going to be able to have the defrost work, and I definitely want defrost working. So that is my current plan of attack on this. So yeah, I just very lazily drop the dash down. Very, again, lazily put the heater ducting back on the dash. And this time, with that block off plate installed, I can sit it in there and it's not interfering with anything. In fact, I can actually raise that dash up a little bit. So this is what I think I'm going to be doing for the dash. So here I'm just doing a little bit of pondering, and like that's my dash pad. So I just want to figure out what's got to screw to where, how that's got to go. I'm gonna have to make some cuts in the dash pad. So I'm just kind of, yeah, just getting it all squared away in my mind. So at this point, I'm fairly happy with how the dash is. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of cleanup in the car. Right, with the dash in place, as I've been walking around the shop, I have been very conscientious that I don't drop anything on my rad. So instead of continuing to walk on eggshells around it, I'm gonna throw the fans back on it, and I'm going to just get this mounted back up in the car. I don't want to have to worry about stepping on it, tripping on it, dropping something on it like that. It's just such a huge burden to have to worry about that. yeah, so now that I got the rad back in, I'm kind of sitting here going like, what am I gonna do? And so I realized I've got these fender mounts, these little rods coming off the front end with the tabs on them, and I've torn up a few shirts on how sharp that edge is. So I'm like, screw it, I'm finally going to weld both sides back down to the tube front end, and so let's get at it. On the driver's side, the tube is sitting quite a bit farther away from the actual front end than it needs to be. So I'm just going to heat it up a little bit. I'm going to throw a little bit of a punch in there. I'm just going to beat it down and get it so that's pretty much touching the front end, and then I can go ahead and weld it. So I figure since I got the welder out, what I need to do is I need to add some tabs to the front end, and what these tabs are going to do is allow me to zip tie the wires up to them. So before I just had zip ties around the entire tubes, which, I mean, it works, but it doesn't look great, and like, I don't know, eventually I want to put a plate in between the tube front end and the bottom just to kind of clean it up and make sure that as I'm driving down the road I'm not throwing water and stuff in the engine bay. So I'm going to put these tabs on to hold the wires. So I do know better. It's almost impossible to get a good arc with a magnet near, but I keep trying and I'm just not having a good time with it. I'm getting pretty frustrated because it's just not working. But I do eventually get a tack, so I quickly go and I weld up the other side. And now I switch my tactic. I'm not using a magnet. I'm just going to try and get a tack on there. And on this one, like, for whatever reason, I just cannot get a tack between the two pieces. It just will not mate. I'm just so annoyed at this point in time because why can't I just use a fucking magnet? I mean, I know that magnets and TIG welding is a thing that's not going to happen, but I try anyways. I just need a quick little tack. Like, I just need the smallest amount of fusion to make this work. So at this point in time on the weld, it's just bubbling. It's not doing what it needs to do. I'm getting really frustrated, and I'm starting to not feel the greatest. Got a bit of a headache. So this is kind of where I call it. So that is all the time that we have for the week. So as always, if you stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.